sometimes I'm not sure. I mean, I've got some thoughts I did pull together on that. I can also give you an update of where we are in terms of getting out a new version for Axis, which is not out the door yet. It's taking a little longer, but we're getting close. So what you're looking at here is just the list of all the portfolios and households that come straight out of PortfolioCenter. And by the way, the Axis version would look the same way. And the integration between Composite Builder and PortfolioCenter or Axis is very tight. There's no importing or exporting of data. We just read the data directly out of the PortfolioCenter database. And so you enter data in PortfolioCenter, you go into Composite Builder, and it's there. Composite Builder is set up so that firms can build composites from either households or individual accounts. And that's really determined by how the firm manages the money. If a household is managed to a single investment strategy, it might have 5 or 6 different accounts. But if it's managed to a single strategy, then the household is what you want to include in the composite, not the individual accounts. And the primary rationale for that is that one of the things that you're typically interested in when you generate composite returns is the dispersion of the individual portfolio returns within the composite. So if they're all being managed to the same strategy, you would expect the dispersion to be very low. The standard deviation, for example, would be low of the portfolio returns within the composite. If the standard deviation is very high, then it makes you think, okay, well, I really don't have one single investment management strategy going on in this composite, or just, which is kind of an interesting question in wealth management firms anyway, since a lot of firms, try to, tailor their investment strategies, to each individual household, and so just by nature of doing that, you're going to get a fair amount of dispersion of the returns of individual portfolios within the composite. But that's probably less dispersion, though, than if you, the flip side of that is if you're managing a single household, but then you include the individual accounts in a composite, your dispersion's going to tip your returns on those individual accounts are going to be all over the place. Especially if you got one portfolio that holds all the cash and another portfolio that typically might hold all the fixed income, for tax reasons, and the rest of the portfolio is holding the equities, then looking at those individual accounts, you're not going to see a return that's representative of the strategy that's being implemented overall at the household level. Does that make sense?
You're just going to see a lot of dispersion, especially if you're looking at the individual accounts, is what you're saying. So
right.
So if you create a composite with all your accounts, it's not really going to be representative, perhaps, of very much.
That's true. But I do have a couple firms as clients that only have one composite. I mean, the strategy is similar across all portfolios, but it's customized, and so their dispersion is very high within the composite. But that's because in wealth management firms where the strategies are typically customized, for each household, there's no getting around that. I mean, if you're a separate accounts manager that manages every single account according to a cookie cutter approach, managed to a model, then your dispersion is going to be pretty tight.
Yeah, and that's probably a better way to use this. That's probably a better way to use GIPS compliance, is to do it with a specific type of portfolio, a specific type of model portfolio, rather than create a composite for, John Smith advisory firm, because if you're doing that, customizing each portfolio to each individual client, then you're not really going to show very much with that. It's not going to be as effective.
Well, it won't be as effective, but you're still going to get. I mean, here's even given the problems of that. From at least from my perspective, if you're managing money as a fiduciary, it seems that how are you going to answer that inevitable question that comes from a client? How has your firm done? So what number are you going to give them? That's going to be as representative as possible. You don't really want to give them a model.
But John, when you're working with clients, do you encourage them to make their GIPS compliant record maybe specific to a type of portfolio rather than a firm composite?
Let me see how would I answer that question. I mean, the GIPS compliance is firm-wide, and firms are compliant even if they only have one composite. But the issue is. But the problem, which I think you clearly understand, though, is coming up is deciding on where do you draw the line with your composites. If you've got 200 accounts that are all managed differently, the difficulty often is grouping those accounts together into meaningful composites, and sometimes it's very difficult for a client to do that.
What are they doing? I mean, are they walking away with one composite? Do they have multiple composites? Are the composites simply a composite of everything that's in the firm without regard to a strategy, or is it more strategy specific probably?
Right. It actually, firms are attempting to make them strategy specific. I do have two firms that only have one composite. But in one case it actually is because the strategy is, that's legitimate. They have one strategy they sell as a firm with, a little bit of tweaks for individual customization, but overall it's still the same strategy. They implement the same, they use the same universe of equities and selection across all accounts. Now, in another firm that has one composite, that's because every single account is highly customized. And plus, they don't have historical records to back up what portfolio belonged in what composite, 5 years. And so that's just sort of a decision they made just to have one composite.
Yeah, by the way,
put everything in it.
I'm seeing firms, when they convert, more and more, rather than trying to reproduce every transaction, historically going back 20 years, when they convert their portfolio management software from one to another, they're often being told at this point, hey, look, we're not going to take every transaction. You're going to have that as your historical data, and you're going to cut off, and we're just going to begin reporting differently here. How do firms handle that in GIPS? I mean, you have to have every transaction, or can you get around it? I'm just wondering.
Well, okay, so if you've computed performance returns in another system that are GIPS compliant, you can import those on a monthly and annual basis into Composite Builder. So, for example, we've got one firm in California that was doing all their work in spreadsheet. I mean, they use PortfolioCenter, but they were doing all the work in spreadsheets outside of PortfolioCenter. And so rather than and at this point, they don't want to go back. I mean, changes have occurred in their database. They can't really go back and reconstruct those historical returns on a live basis. And so we built an import so you can actually import the monthly composite returns into Composite Builder and then build the returns on an ongoing basis using live data from PortfolioCenter and Composite Builder. And so the same thing would work if a firm was transitioning from Access to PortfolioCenter. If they have historical data from Access, they can import that into Composite Builder. If they got historical composite data, that is. But you do need, in order to do composites, you would need individual portfolio values at each month boundary and the
But not
returns for
necessarily,
each portfolio.
right, but not necessarily the underlying transactions.
Right, that's
yeah.
true.
Okay.
You just need total portfolio values and returns.
Yeah, because guys that are switching over from like an older system like DB Cams, that might be valuable to them, I think, because those are the ones where you have this historic database going back 20 years where people, if they're coming into a more modern system now, they're not taking every transaction. They're just beginning at, January 1 and calculating forward, which is what we're talking about.
Right. But there's a couple other things at play here that even if you haven't switched systems, I mean, even in PortfolioCenter, if you've been using that, it can be difficult to go back and reconstruct historical returns from even, 5 years ago. Because you may have changed the structure of your household accounts. What you've got listed as a household today, may not be the same as it was 5 years ago. I mean, for example, the kind of standard example is, if there was an account for a minor in a household, now that minor's grown up, he has his own relationship with the advisor, or maybe he even left. What happens a lot of times in these systems is people just take those accounts out of the household and report on an ongoing basis with the current structure of the household. There's no way to go back and reconstruct what that history was. Or it's very difficult to do anyway. Most advisors, at least advisors in the wealth management area, often wind up having a bunch of accounts in their accounting database that are carried there only as an accommodation to a client. They're not actively managed accounts, but they're just carried, maybe they're below the minimum size. It's an IRA or a kid's account or an aunt's account or something that they're just carrying that's not actively managed. There are also accounts that have varying degrees of management that occur, or varying degrees of discretion. So what we've done in Composite Builder is give you these data fields where you can classify those accounts that are not really managed. They should not be included in the universe of accounts that are included in your total firm asset calculation. And also there are accounts that should not be included in a composite. Likewise, there are other accounts that are managed to some degree, but they may have restrictions imposed by the client that effectively keep that account from being a good representative of the investment strategy. So in GIPS terms, that would be an account in which the client has said, I don't want any SIN stocks, but yet the strategy that's being implemented has loads of SIN stocks. So that account is being managed, but it's not really representative of the strategy. In the GIPS terms, that account would be labeled as non-discretionary because the strategy can't be fully implemented. And so what we've done is, for example, if you've got an account that's carried only as an accommodation to a client, you can exclude that account from firm assets. You can say that it's not managed. You notice the timeline at the bottom of the screen turned from red to gray, indicating that it cannot be included in a composite. And then likewise, if we change this back to yes, if an account is non-discretionary. And again, an account from a GIPS perspective could be considered non-discretion even if the advisor technically has legal discretion over the account. The operative concept in the GIPS world is, can the investment policy of this portfolio be fully implemented without any restrictions from the client?
Yes.
Because if it can't, it should not be included in a composite.
Yeah. So what you've done is just created a dashboard so that when you have exceptions, you have accounts that you don't want to include in a composite, you're able to manage it.
Right, you're managing it, because one of the things that we're trying to do in Composite Builder is at any point in time you can click this button, not in a composite, and it will tell you, any accounts in your database that are eligible to be included in a composite that have not yet been put in a composite. So you always know what you're working against. And if you've got 5,000 or 6,000 accounts and half a dozen composites, this is a very laborious kind of list of accounts to come up with if you've got to do it manually. But of course the computer does it almost instantaneously. But the key thing is that any account that you've marked as non-discretionary or unmanaged is never going to show up in this list, because what Composite Builder is trying to do is make sure that you've accounted for every portfolio over time from its inception to the date it closes, whether or not it's included in a composite. So right now there's actually a pretty big list of portfolios that are not included in a composite. Let's look at a portfolio that actually is included in a composite. This is fairly representative from what I see in a lot of client firms, is that over the life of an account, the strategy implemented in that portfolio or that household can periodically change. And so we have this portfolio that was at one time initially included in the aggressive growth composite. Then it moved to the balanced composite, and then finally it moved back to aggressive growth. So you see those time periods reflected in the timeline below. And then the other thing that this illustrates is there are periods of time where the strategy is under implementation in this portfolio that it is explicitly omitted from any composite. And this is another key concept in GIPS. I mean, for this 2-month period here, this portfolio, while it's under implementation, is not representative of the strategy, so you take it out of the composite. Likewise, when it switches from one strategy to another, you've got a similar time period that occurs. And again, these are all periods of time that Composite Builder takes into account when it's looking at your overall database to determine, where is this portfolio, and does it need at any point in time to be included in a composite. So it's very simple to put a portfolio in a composite. If you want to do it one at a time, you just click the Add to Composite button, select the composite from the list, and then enter the date range that it belongs. Now, you can also, if we go to the Composite tab, we get a view of the whole composite, and at the bottom of this screen you see all the portfolios that are included in this composite and the time period that each portfolio is included. So you can also add portfolios one at a time from this list, but we've built a number of tools to make it much easier to manage composites. We have a mass add, for example, in which you could actually sort. Let's sort this list by model. So I could come in here and select all these portfolios that had the same model and add them to the composite in one swoop, for example. Now, I can also, in addition to just selecting a bunch, I can define a rule. And this rule is pretty simple. Actually, let's take this stuff off first. This rule says that I want to include every portfolio in this composite that's included in the aggressive growth set in PortfolioCenter. So it's looking over at an attribute of this portfolio in PortfolioCenter, and it's going to build the rule based on on that attribute. And so if we click OK and save this, we can then execute the rule, and it's going to go out and grab every portfolio in PortfolioCenter that's a member of that set. And a set in PortfolioCenter is a collection of portfolios. Okay, now it's added everything, and then I've got a status report that's popped up behind here somewhere due to GoToMeeting. Oh, here it is. And it's telling me every portfolio that was added, and then it will also tell me any portfolio that could not be added, and that's because I've got portfolios that were in that set that were already included in the portfolio, already included in the composite. So it gives me a status report, it tells me what it did, and then I go back and I can see Here's all the members of that composite. Now, when we go to compute the, well, actually, let's look at one other thing here. Okay, that was a very simple rule. Rules can actually get much more complex. The rule can look at the portfolio size. It can also look at the portfolio's asset allocation. And so, for example, I could create a rule that says include every portfolio in this composite that has an equity asset class that is greater than 80%. And I can build a rule based on asset class, sector code, security type, subsector, and this, of course, can be in combination with, or even security type like mutual funds. That could be in combination with the size of the portfolio. So now, when I run this version of the rule, it's actually going to go to PortfolioCenter, and this is a rule that, I mean, it kind of illustrates the close connection to PortfolioCenter. But in this case, we will go and look at the asset allocation of every portfolio in PortfolioCenter since that portfolio's inception through the end of the last month, and include any portfolios on a month-by-month basis in the composite that meet the criteria that's expressed in this rule.
How are advisors using this to grow their firms, to change their marketing strategy? Because I'm curious, are you having advisors that are creating niche composites? So if I only serve doctors, I want to segregate my doctor clients and say, look, this is what we've done with doctors.
Well, you would not be able to build a composite just for doctors. I mean, the rule is you have to build a composite that includes every account in your database if you want to be GIPS compliant. I mean, every account that qualifies. Most of the firms that are using Composite Builder, a few of them have some institutional business. And if they've got, they may be separate accounts managers, or they may be doing investment work for small foundations. But primarily, they want to be, and in that arena, in the institutional arena, it's almost a requirement. If you're going to respond to a request to an RFP for somebody looking for an investment manager, it's essentially a requirement now that you be GIPS compliant, because otherwise they're not really going to look at your proposal. Now, for firms that don't do institutional business, the reason they're also becoming GIPS compliant for competitive reasons, but it's because they want to be able to say that we follow really the best practice with measuring performance and presenting performance numbers. And therefore, when you ask us the question, which is inevitable, well, how has the firm done when managing clients' money? They can say, here are our composite returns, and by the way, we are GIPS compliant, and our returns have been and our composite returns have been verified. That's sort of the ultimate standard in being able to present your numbers to a client. And so they're using it because they want to be able to present returns to prospective clients.
Yeah, I think that's only part of the advantage that you could gain from having a GIPS compliant track record, to be frank. There are many more marketing things that you could do with search engine optimization.
What, in terms of just your advertising?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, firms that want to advertise their returns, yeah, I mean, it helps when you advertise if you say you're GIPS compliant. But, as we all know, you better make sure if you say that you are, otherwise, they can, the SEC will come down pretty hard.
Yeah, there's been some stuff about how that's being dealt with, and actually, and I should check in on that with the CFA Institute.
In fact, Amy Jones just wrote a paper. She and Aaron wrote a paper for like a compliance journal or something like that, that looked in detail at one of the most recent cases where, the firm was claiming GIPS compliance. They weren't anywhere near.
No, but there's some new rules actually on how that can be checked online, and I'm going to go back and explore that.
Right. Well, there is a new requirement to be GIPS compliant, is that you have to report your returns report your compliance status to the CFA Institute.
Yeah. So by doing that, I think it's going to create a link to your website from them.
Yeah, I don't know if it does that or not.
Well, there's something you could do from what I recall. I covered this previously. Practical marketing things you could do with a GIPS compliant track record in terms of, graphically and, your messaging is, this could really influence your messaging, I think. And how many firms are you doing this with now?
We got 20 firms as clients.
Not a lot. Is this scalable? Yeah. I mean, in other words, is it scalable? What's your plan? What are you doing with it?
Well, I'm trying to grow. There's two of us in Norwood Consulting right now. And if this, doubles again to 40 or 50 in the next year, which I'm hoping it will, then, we may get, I'm probably going to pull in another employee. I've got this in conjunction with still with the error checking software that we had. Being GIPS compliant is not for everybody. That's for sure. It's kind of funny. Some of the firms that are using it have gotten up and running and gotten compliant amazingly fast, like in 2 to 3 months. Other firms, it's going to take them a year or more.
What's the difference?
The difference is the level of record keeping that they have about where the firms, have been historically in terms of the strategy that was being implemented in each account. Some firms have that information in an easy-to-use, organized fashion. Other firms don't. And so what some firms are doing that don't have, the well-documented track record. And by the way, to be GIPS compliant, you have to have documentation about changes in investment strategy for each portfolio. It's not good enough just to say, okay, here's the numbers. You've got to know where everybody belonged over the time period for which you're claiming compliance. And so what some firms are doing is they're getting Composite Builder, and they can go back a couple of years in time, or maybe 3 or 4, but then you're going to grow into compliance. To be compliant, you have to have at least a 5-year track record to claim compliance, unless your firm is not yet 5 years old. If your firm's only a year old, then you can claim it from the inception of the firm. But if you're 10 years old, you've got to go back 5 years. Is the minimum. And sometimes firms don't have a track record 5 years old. Right. So they go back 3 years, and then they're going to wait 2 years. They're going to accrue the next 2 years. And
build the record.
Exactly.
And learn how to do it in the meantime.
Right. The other big takeaway for me is that, some firms really do need assistance from somebody like Amy Jones, a GIPS consultant. Either they're going to pay their verifier.
This is the woman I introduced you to?
Yes.
So that's turned into a good relationship for you.
Right. In fact, we have three clients in common now.
Good.
And a couple more prospects in the works. But she's turned out to be invaluable, especially for firms that aren't really up on what the GIPS standards are, and they need assistance in sort of understanding what the decisions are they have to make, what the ramifications of those decisions are, helping someone, really frame what it is they have to decide and make those choices.
Now, for you, Mr. Norwood, this is kind of, Act 2 in a great story. You famously shepherded, if you were one of the early guys on PortfolioCenter. I know you weren't, I don't know if you would say you were a founder of PortfolioCenter, but you were certainly an early an early executive in the company,
Right.
and then you went on to run the company and own it, I believe, and got bought out by Schwab back in 1994, maybe, yeah. And so you got bought out by Schwab and continued to work. These weren't the crazy days when guys that were bought out could just retire. You had to continue to work for Schwab, and and today that doesn't happen. People get bought out and it's like crazy prices, but it wasn't like that. So you continued to work for Schwab from '94 till, I guess, probably for another 10 years, maybe.
Well,
almost
2008.
Oh my gosh, even more. And then in 2008, you went on your own and you started doing this eventually, and this is where you're at. So
Right.
This is Act Two, another company that you're bringing to advisors, and it's different for you this time, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. It's a different structure. I mean, I'm older. It's a little slower paced. But I'm just trying to do this. I mean, one of the things that we did, and plus I'm my own investor. I don't have any outside investors. Because I didn't want the crazy, confused capital structure that we had with Performance Technologies initially. We had 25 investors in Performance Technologies.
I remember it was crazy. Yeah, I remember you told me that story once.
Yeah. So, my business plan is to continue to grow the number of users that we have for Composite Builder, but also to continue to build, to continue to increase the number of portfolio accounting systems that we integrate with. I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket with PortfolioCenter. That's why we've been working hard on the Access version. And when we finish the Access version, we're going to move on to somebody else. Which means, we've got to, right now we've been working on desktop systems. We'll be working with hosted systems.
Great.
I mean, that's inevitable whether we stay with PortfolioCenter, just with PortfolioCenter and Access. But, there's still a lot of firms using Advent Access.
I want to ask you about that. What are you seeing in terms of firms using Advent Access? I mean, I offer a reporting product on Advent Access and PortfolioCenter, and to me, it seems like it's a shrinking market, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, they seem to be switching to. I mean, it's kind of funny. A lot of them are still switching to PortfolioCenter. A lot of them are switching to Orion. A lot of folks are switching to Tamarack. Of course, they don't realize that the engine under that is PortfolioCenter, but it just it doesn't look like that to the people that switch over to it.
Yeah.
So, and then of course a lot of people are going to Black Diamond. In fact, an awful lot of Access users have moved to Black Diamond. They didn't move to APX. Instead, they kind of moved to Black Diamond. But there's still somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 Access users out there.
Wow.
Based on what I can talking to Access consultants.
And how about PortfolioCenter?
There's 3,000 plus still users of PortfolioCenter. I mean, they still collect license fees from Tamarack for all the users that are on PortfolioCenter there. I mean, I'm not sure I'm not sure what the
percentage
is. Yeah, I'm not sure what the pricing is on that. And then PortfolioCenter is, they're in the midst of building an entire new accounting system that's all going to be hosted in the cloud.
Right. Had to do that.
And it looks pretty good.
Oh, you've seen it.
Well, I mean, I've seen the early pieces they did of it. They did a short demo at Impact in November, and then of course I'm still staying in pretty close contact with those guys. I have lunch with somebody down there once a month, so I'm kind of get to see what's going on. So that's going to be pretty dramatic. Okay, so a couple things that we're doing in Composite Builder, when we compute results, there's no black box. I mean, we save all the details, so your numbers can be completely audited. So when we compute the composite return, initially you see them computed on a year-by-year basis here. And this is all test data, so these returns don't actually look very good. But you can drill down into a year, and you can see for each month, you can see every portfolio that goes into that composite for that monthly composite return. And so all the details behind the composite are preserved in the results within the system. So that way you can always, if you've got any questions about where the number's coming from, you can go back and see. Now the other thing we do, which is a real problem for a lot of firms doing composites, is pulling together all the data that you need for a third-party verifier to do the verification on a quarterly or annual basis. And so what we did, we worked with, if I click my reset button, we worked with Ashland Partners to develop a set of export files that you can run these for a year, a month, a quarter, and give Ashland exactly the data that they need to do a verification. And so in the PortfolioCenter world, pulling all this data together can take as much as a week based on conversations that I've had with clients. Ashland Partners, they are a accounting firm that do third-party verifications of performance numbers for firms that are claiming GIPS compliance. So there are a half a dozen different firms that do verification for advisors. Ashland is one of the top tier firms that does that. You set up, you provide the date range, and you click the export button, and the application starts pulling together all the data that Ashland needs to see. And in just a couple of minutes, everything gets generated, and it actually goes into a CSV format file, and you can zip up all these files and upload it to Ashland for them to do their verification.
How do we know that your calculations going in there are correct? Have you done anything to verify that your calculations?
There's another one of the verification firms, the Spalding Group, that certifies software that does performance calculations. The software itself does all the calculations in a manner or format that will enable the firm to be GIPS compliant. So I probably should send you one of these letters. But anyway, so I had that done in August, well actually in September, with the Spalding Group. Actually sent their founder and principal came down and camped out in my office for 2 days and ran Composite Builder through its paces. And so, they've got like eight different criteria that they look for, and they ran the system through its paces and have certified Composite Builder as being, that it behaves in a manner consistent, so it's just to support compliance with the GIPS standards.
Yeah, so is it thinner reviewed? Does it need to be thinner reviewed?
No, doesn't need to be thinner.
Interesting. And Spalding, by the way, that's S-P-A-U-L-D-I-N-G.
Right, Spalding Group.
Yeah, David Spalding, I think, is.
David Spalding, yes. Yes. David's the one that came down and did the certification.
Yeah, David's been a leader in this area for many years.
Yeah, he's a really nice.
Yeah. So